why does everyone have their phone out if living in the moment is so much better? And the reason is that recording things and sharing it turns a moment in time into an asset that can last a lot longer.
Today, I'm talking with Chris Dolinski, a serial founder and the visionary behind Vipehut.io, a groundbreaking video-first social media platform at the forefront of the evolving digital landscape, enabling people to engage, create, and earn online. In this episode, we discuss the creator economy and the evolution of social media, as well as its impact on society. We then draw some parallels with the potential impacts artificial intelligence could have on our future. Welcome to the James Wiles podcast.
So you're the founder of Vipehut. Maybe just tell us a little bit about Vipehut and also what got you into it and why did you decide to create that company?
Yeah, so great to be here. Really excited about this podcast series. I know that we've actually connected on Vipehut, so that makes things even more interesting. But Vipehut is a take on how we should be and how we can interact online. If you go back 10 years, 20 years, the internet is generally a brand new baby. Maybe it's into adolescence now, but generally the internet started as a text-based platform where people would send MSN Messenger messages with each other. Then it went into this Facebook social feed, with Instagram being photo first. And really now, for the first time ever in human history, can we start to imagine a platform that's video first? This way traditionally has been very scary. If you think meeting people online, generally you don't know who you're talking to. We've had spotty calls, drop calls, and generally things have not been socially acceptable to meet people online. What's happened recently, and really one of the reasons that makes Vipehut more approachable now, is that we basically have three major tailwinds that have impacted the entire industry. So the first is that we have high quality video and hardware. So you can even imagine in this call now, we're easily recording at 1080p, and we can stream back to YouTube and things like that. The next one is that COVID actually drastically changed how we interact online. We went from having in-person being the best thing first, and then dialing into conference calls, or COVID really made Zoom calls and video calls far more socially acceptable. And the last part that's really most important is that social media really came into the scene in 2008, 2009. And we've now had 14 years of developing an online reputation that we haven't had in the past. And that reputation is more sticky than some of us might even understand. That reputation follows us across the internet and into real life, where when you're doing job interviews now, when you're connecting with people anywhere, people are like, hey, follow me on Instagram, follow me on TikTok, follow me on LinkedIn. And so that means that since we can embed that into the Vipehut platform, we can now more realistically connect with people in vetted video calls and exclusive video calls with the global talent pool. And that is really something that we've never been able to do in the past. So that's really the idea of Vipehut, is that it's a video first platform to connect with people around topics that you're interested in. So for discussions, but it's also really great for things like coaching and higher learning and education, language learning, and then lastly, things like this where it's content creation, where we can live stream these calls, record these calls out to YouTube, X, TikTok, anything that we like.
Yeah, what I like about Vipehut is that it's good for discovery. So you basically have people that are there mostly live on calls, and you can discover what different people are doing, and there's multiple little communities that you can all join in. So I think that was something that was missing from before. You just had, now you have this one platform you can go to and discover a whole bunch of things that you didn't realize you might have been interested in before.
Yeah. It's very interesting when you have there's a stat that I love right now where last year in 2023, Zoom, the video platform that we all have grown to rely on, had 3.3 trillion minutes of video calls.
Wow.
And it's almost hard to imagine that many minutes of people talking, but that's right from their annual report. And even if it's not 3.3 trillion, even if it's 2 trillion, again, how do you even measure that number? But you can get around a little bit. And if you think about a lot of calls, it makes sense for those calls to be private, right? People send a link for a business transaction or things like that. Those calls, in my opinion, should remain private. that's not really kind of where Biped its sweet spot is. Where we like to focus is on things like yoga instructors or language learners, or again, kind of coaches, or public business office hours, or that kind of entrepreneur that's building in public, or developer that's coding something that needs some feedback, or a musician that would like to kind of have a listening party to talk about their kind of newest riff in their music. And if you use Zoom for that, or any of these Google Meets or Microsoft Teams, what's problematic about it is that, number one, you have to kind of constantly update the link to get access to it. It's always in a very ugly URL with like uppercase letters, lowercase letters, like underscores, exclamation points. That gets very hectic in terms of organization, but also it doesn't allow those people to do these things in public. So you could, as a creator or a business owner, it's almost like having a retail mall, but you can't see all the other businesses. It's just you have your one store there.
Yeah, it's like the benefit of having foot traffic based on your position. And what this reminds me of is in real life, when you compare your situation, maybe let's say, for example, you're on the street corner and you've got some kind of performance that you're doing. Instead of going around to individual people and saying, yeah, come to this location at this address and meet me at this time so that you can see my performance, you're just performing to as many, whoever wants to stop by and have a look. So I think this reminds me of how we're basically transitioning into a digital world and trying to find those similarities to these natural, like almost serendipitous moments that comes from just being a physical person in a physical world, and creating new niches on the internet that can recreate some of those dynamics that we experience as human beings. So I think Biped's definitely filling that gap for sure.
Yeah, I think you're spot on there. We can kind of talk more about it, but
so one thing I was interested in with what you mentioned just now is this transition from text to photos to videos. And from what you've seen, what do you think is the difference in this phase transition from to full video right now, and specifically live video? What do you think? How do you think that's fundamentally changed the dynamic of social media?
Yeah, I think that's an underappreciated topic. I think it's a very great question, and we're clearly kind of exploring it. I don't think it's all figured out. But just from the primitives of them, text-based is very it has a single main attribute, right? You have the text, and oftentimes, like great writers, there's dozens of books or hundreds of books or thousands of books on this, where they will talk about the syntax structure. Like, do you make a short paragraph or a long paragraph, or do you have it in bullet format? And text is, because it's just that kind of one blog post, you have a couple attributes that you can work with. Video changes the game in so many different ways. Even in this call that we're on here, you have the audio, the crispness of the audio, the any kind of additional filters you want to add to the audio. There's anything related to live. People even right there, I said right? It's very common for people not to be thinking as they're speaking, right? Because it's on demand. We have to optimize for that kind of that skill set of being able to think and clearly articulate things in a way that people can understand. And also the responsiveness of a live conversation is totally different than from text. You can think about your next sentence for a week and then write that sentence. When you're face to face with someone, if you don't respond within kind of 10 or 20 seconds, it becomes a very awkward conversation, right?
Yeah, for sure.
And then in addition to that, it's the audio, the kind of the structure of the conversation, and then it's also the ambiance of the entire environment we're in. Right? You basically become you get a major in film production pretty quickly as you start to kind of go about creating video content.
Yeah, it's almost one abstraction level you can think about is if at the end of the day it's communication between people. A lot of the communication is not the words you've used, but it's a lot of stuff. It's visual cues, body language, tempo. All of those things go into the amount of information that you're transferring. So I think video, a single photo is worth like 1 million words potentially. Now you have moving images, so the amount of information you can get from that in like a data transfer way, it's a huge amount of information. So I think that is definitely a phase shift. Let's talk a little bit about this bigger concept of the creator economy, and you're involved in it. Maybe can you just start off like what is the creator economy and what makes it different to other ways to make money or other aspects of the economy at large?
Yeah, it's another great question. So to me, the creator economy has existed forever. We've always had people, if you go back, like, I don't know how far you want to go back, but basically people have always tried to entertain and provide value to each other. We have this term now, the creator economy, which in many ways kind of means earning money online, doing something of value online so that people will either follow you. You'll have a lot of views. Obviously, those people that see it might not follow you, but they might say like, "Hey, that's really shocking" or something. So I'm gonna follow that. Or I'm gonna watch that. And then the last major piece and the kind of final frontier of the creator economy is monetizing online. How do you turn those eyeballs and those followers into something that translates into US denominated or just currency denominated results? And a lot of us now are kind of have taken this approach where traditionally we would all kind of start with jobs or have corporate jobs or professional careers. And we have learned that the leverage that is presented by the internet provides a totally new frontier. The creator economy is less structured by the hours of the day. It is a 24/7 thing. So when you create content, not only can people view it on their phone or their laptop from anywhere in the world, additionally to that, they can see it at, they can really kind of interact with it at any point in time as well. It's a 24/7 game. The other benefit of it is that the technology replicates that content. So if you have even this live stream that we have here or this kind of recording, the second we kind of go through post-production and then we upload it to YouTube or TikTok or Instagram or any of these platforms, we now have an asset that can be shared forever. So it's very much one of these things where creating content becomes a huge, in kind of finance speak, it becomes an option or almost like thought of as a lottery ticket. So you put out a piece of content. If it is unique enough, a lot of people will kind of watch it, but then more importantly, they have this ability to share it rapidly to brand new networks. And so you have this kind of compounding or this multiple effect that can go straight to the stratosphere, where we talk about this term of like going viral. And that really is, going viral is the holy grail. And going viral is synonymous of basically a lot of people seeing your content really rapidly. And having that kind of, that audience means that if you can kind of draw that audience at relative will, then you can sell back into that audience, right? You can sell your own merchandise, or you can sell on behalf of other people, advertisers, other businesses, and kind of talk about their products. And at the end of the day, most of it's either a expression of our creative side or our artistic side, or it's a money proposition where we just want to kind of cash in and make some money.
That's very interesting. So in some ways, we're developing technology in the digital realm that is recreating a lot of the stuff we would experience in the real world, in like traditional human social interactions. But in many ways, it's fundamentally different in the digital world. Like you said, you mentioned something going viral. It's very difficult in the real world to go viral, as a human being. But in the digital world, it's kind of a totally different dynamic. So what are some of the aspects of the digital world that people are maybe taking for granted or haven't really quite grasped at the big difference of being online versus if you're like, let's say, an artist or a singer or something like that, and you're used to making a living, going to different venues, booking out your time, that kind of thing. What's the fundamental difference about having that content online or having an online first approach?
Yeah, this is another great question. So there are a number of massive differences. One of the biggest differences related to the physical world and the digital world is that in the digital world, you can iterate on things quickly. In the physical world, in the olden days, if you put out like a record or if you had a performance at, we're in Toronto right now, so like the Rogers Stadium or like a huge conference or concert venue, you basically have one shot, right? And that's a high risk proposition. Like if you are an artist or a DJ kind of going out to the Rogers Center, you're going to practice ahead of time. You're going to say, okay, I'm going to do this, 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 and this, and that's going to be my show. Online offers that style as well, and you have kind of you can think of online almost like a Netflix or a YouTube documentary or something like that. They are going to craft it very closely, but it also opens up this other massive venue, which I'm a huge fan of Gary Vee and some of his content, but some things are really kind of seared in my mind. And he has this one saying of document, don't create. And what that really strikes a balance in is saying that most of the time, if you think about a DJ or a concert, or a movie, for instance, they are creating. It's a whole production system. Whereas online, you can just bring people along your journey. You can say, hey, I am creating a business. I'm a musician. I'm creating some new music. And you don't have to launch everything. It is not either I'm launching an album or I have nothing and just wait till this kind of like this final day where I release something. It's I'm going to share with you 15 seconds of my song 3 times a week or 10 times a week and bring your whole audience along with you. And
along the journey of the behind the scenes and what goes into actually creating the content. So you have the content there as well, but just the act of creating the content is very watchable, and that's something that people like. And I know a few startup founders who actually took that approach, especially in the crypto world. So they decided to create a series on YouTube where they recorded the behind the scenes of their startup, everything that went into like going on this massive roller coaster ride of creating a startup in the crypto world. And they took that approach because if they just have the finished product that's out there, that's lacking something. That where if you go to the YouTube channel, you see the behind the scenes, it adds authenticity. You see the people, you see their struggles, you see that they're really trying. They're not doing a rug pull. They're actually like legitimately trying to make a product that's worthwhile. So that's an interesting dynamic, is like bringing people along with the journey and creating a narrative around not just the story you're telling people, but your story of telling the story as well.
Yeah, and you know what? It's so nice when you have that kind of that lens to look at it. What it means is it's also far more approachable than a lot of people think. Most people you talk to, if you talk to an accountant or something, I'll just use a generic profession, they wouldn't see themselves as a creator or an actor. And that, in my mind, in these days, is leaving a huge open field for all of the accountants that are basically have typecast themselves as just an accountant.
That's your input, that's your output.
Yes.
That's it.
Yes, and they could easily say like, hey, like, I don't know, if you want some tax advice, you should be thinking about this here. And it could just be a quick update. The other thing about it too is that a lot of people think about their profession as like, it takes up the most of their day. It's very common in our modern age for people to say like, I don't have time. When in fact, if you compared all of the things you did in a day today or could do in a day versus what you could do 30 years ago without the internet, it's like you have 3 weeks extra every single day because you could send out an email. You're not walking to the postal office. You're not video editing software. It's one click and everything gets edited quickly, or caption software. Like you can put out so much more content. And what that means is that you can also, as you bring people along the journey, they have come to appreciate that you are living your life. So that means the content doesn't have to be at a certain bar. And if you do want it to be at a higher bar, you can outsource that work to someone on Upwork or use software to do it. So you can basically get high quality output with a very minimal kind of post-production phase. It's kind of a half hour for an hour worth of video versus previously it could be a half a week or a week just to edit some of this stuff.
Yeah, it's very interesting. It almost makes me think that there's a different dynamic where you have in-person work, remote work, and almost like online work. And you could be either in-person or remote, but it's like a three-ringed Venn diagram of saying, also consider this third angle of whatever you're doing, have an online presence, have an online aspect to what you're doing, where just what might be considered your day-to-day life, that might be content for other people that would be interested in that profession or what you're doing. Or I mean, I guess all of us at the end of the day learn things by our specific niche in society that could be valuable to other people. Just having that somewhere to share is you don't know how valuable it potentially is until you expose it to the internet.
Yeah, that's a super point. What you just said, where it's you don't know how valuable your content is. So if it's useful for you or if it's part of your day, there are likely thousands of people that are doing very similar things to you. And so you being the one to document it immediately provides you an audience, right? So you're doing what you're doing. Now you have people that are like, oh, well, I'm starting my first startup too, or I'm learning how to code right now. I'm learning a new language, or I'm traveling to somewhere. those things are very repeatable and pattern-like behavior of a lot of humans. And so we're in this brand new phase right now where just being a content creator alone is a fantastic opportunity. The other thing about creating content is that unlike a lot of people like to live in the moment, which I think is a fantastic thing, the tools that we have now make it a little bit easier to record the moment while we still live in the moment. But it's a big kind of talking point of a lot of early creators being like, well, don't bring out your phone. There are images now online. Be like, there's 1,000 phones at a conference venue or a concert. And they're like, that's insane. Like, those people should really just be living in the moment, right? The tools that we have now basically allow us to kind of blend the gap, right? We can do both. But most importantly, we might want to ask the question of like, why does everyone have their phone out if living in the moment is so much better? And the reason is that recording things and sharing it turns a moment in time into an asset that can last a lot longer. So just like going to stay at a hotel versus owning the hotel. Well, you can go stay for one night, but if you own the hotel, you now have accommodations for the rest of your life. And it is a totally different thing. It is a transaction versus an ownership mentality. It's a kind of energy-seeking mentality versus an asset-owning mentality.
That's interesting. So if we go back to like what's fundamentally different about online versus in person, you effectively are creating experiences that are with 100% recall. So in the past, if you had an experience, it was always a bit like hazy as to what exactly happened, especially depending on what type of event it was. But now with video and these kind of recording devices, you have like crystal clear recollection, which is probably a dynamic that we still have to adapt to as a species. Like knowing exactly what happened with evidence of that, like 100 years later, is quite a new thing that we need to get our heads around. Another aspect that I was thinking about is how things can scale online is fundamentally different. So once something's online, and maybe I can phrase this question as the difference between people who are growing up with this ability to create content that has perfect recall and the scale of potentially having that information go, viral to millions of people very quickly. And compare that with the people that have come online later in their lives, where they have a lot more sophisticated ideas around what content to put out. So in other words, like I'm saying, with a bit of life experience, you realize kind of like how to frame yourself, how to present yourself for specific purposes. Let's take politicians as an example, right? How many young people now would have very not great content of them online if they would decide to run for some kind of political position or the CEO of some company going forward? Do you think the fact that so much of what we're doing is online now and is recorded and does have this legacy of your entire history when you were young, dumb, and maybe intoxicated at a rave party or something, versus what you're going to do later on in life? And in real life, you could always that was like a different part of your life. Maybe you move to a big city, you start your life again. But if you're online, it's almost like that's you, that's your persona. And how do we overcome that? And how do you think about potentially changing your brand or changing your reputation if there's 100% recall of things that you might have wanted to leave in your past?
Yeah, I think people are learning at a far younger age the importance of a reputation in general. I think there's a human need to explore, and I think people are coming to grips more with what is kind of socially acceptable to fail at. And also, what's funny about it is that what's socially acceptable isn't locked in stone. Some days things are socially acceptable, and then some days things are not socially acceptable. An easy consideration is something like cannabis. Cannabis for like years now has been an illegal substance. Like here, I don't actually know all the details about it, but let's say like basically if you had weed on you or whatever, you'd be thrown in jail.
You're a criminal.
Yeah, you're a criminal, right? It's like you're worse than dirt, right? It's like you're the worst person ever. And now, all of a sudden, in 2 years, everything is either decriminalized or it's not as big of a deal, right? And so how crazy is that? Where it's like some of these things are very set in stone, and then other things are not. And I think we're in this new age now. It's you almost can draw like a 5-year period here where we went from like pre-internet and like pre-like blockchain specifically to internet is now a piece of our society, and like post-blockchain where everything is a crystal clear recall of everything that you've ever done. And I think that has sweeping impacts on everything, right? I think that what that means is it in many ways, it could be harder for some people that are a little bit scrappier or a little bit kind of looking to advance the world to try things. People are going to be more afraid to make mistakes because that mistake gets immortalized. It's, hey, Grandpa, I remember you made that mistake on June 23rd, 2024. Like, what were you thinking that day?
Yeah,
Like,
here's the address of the token
that's right.
that became non-fungible at
Yeah,
this stage.
yeah. Here's the address. Here's the location where you're at. This is what you look like. This is what you said. Like, and it's just like you really immortalize that. Whereas almost the human memory has this ability to kind of like deprioritize things that were kind of annoying or like minor slip-ups, and we will almost forget about it. Be like, oh, I guess I did do that.
And you can influence people's opinion of you over time. So you can like make up for things. You can you can represent the past in ways that makes maybe something more forgivable. But if you always have that video of that scene and you rewatch it, you're right back there and you're just as pissed off as you were 10 years later.
Totally.
So it's a different dynamic that I think we're still adapting to.
Yeah, some like things like drama in relationships or anything can actually last a lot longer now. Where and I think people are just going to have to adjust. It is a new normal. I don't, in terms of like, do we see this changing or is it going to get more intense or less intense? I would likely say it's probably going to get more intense. I think that people will be watching each other and kind of having the perfect filter for metadata or conversational data that they will then kind of have full text search where they'll be like, hey, when did this person say something like that? And even more importantly with things like AI is that you will be able to say like, hey, like I'm looking for something on this person, or like tell me when this person has done something really great, right? Then it's like, and here's every aspect of that person on the web doing something that's great or something that like you don't agree with, to if you want to build a case or something like that. Like there's just so many ways to approach this now. And I think that as you're talking about the people that have lived in the past kind of had this like, I don't know, they basically had this life before the internet where it's like, hey, like we did insane things. And there will be other podcasts where people actually say these things, be like, thank God I didn't grow up on the internet because I was a crazy man or I was a crazy lady, right? And it's like now I'm a little bit wiser and I kind of learned the importance of kind of doing things in a certain way, but it's not to a pure benefit of society. Like we as a society are constantly benefiting from those risk takers, those people that do things that are non-standard because they are the explorers of what is possible. And that doesn't come for free. It comes at a cost. Those people may do something that you disagree with. But that's how we learn about something new. And so I think society will start to appreciate that a little bit more, but it probably will be a little bit more muted. I think that majority of people are conservative in nature. And so when they know that they can get in trouble and reasonably expect that it's going to kind of come back to them, they will tone it down a little bit.
Yeah, it's interesting because there's a couple aspects there. There's almost like in the past, if you were as reckless as you wanted to be, what ultimately kept you in check is like law, and then physics. Social, and I mean, there's social norms and there's culture and that kind of stuff, but you could be isolated to a culture that made something acceptable or not. But the law is kind of the foundation, depending on which jurisdiction you're on, and how that's changing online, where like the potential platform you're on or whatever can have their opinions of you and affect that. And another angle to this thing about going online and what's a recent change technologically is that you've got perfect recall of specific things you've done over your entire online presence. But now it's discoverability of those things, as you mentioned, is also a bit of a phase shift. So in the past, if you had enough content, and this was something that they tried in the Soviet era, there was this idea that instead of trying to hide information that's out there or trying to cover it up, what you do is you just produce so much information that it's all a mess, and it's very difficult to pick out what's
Yeah.
true and what's not true. So you kind of like overload the system with too much information
Yeah.
at this other angle. And now, so you could say that the fundamental thing that Google did, which was different, was search.
Yeah.
And the way it works now is it's very good at finding specific pieces of information based on search terms. But with LLMs now, there's one way to think about it is you're compressing all potential information and having a way to figure out based on a text prompt at the moment still, or some kind of embeddable graphic or some kind of embeddable information, how that relates to other stuff out there and how combinations of these concepts are related to potentially all information that's ever been recorded. So that undoes a lot of this problem of putting too much information out there. And even if you have only one small amount of information, it's all discoverable. I mean, that's the way it's going. It's like LLMs is a compressed representation of the whole internet. And with a single sentence, you can pick up anything that's ever been put out there. So I guess the question is, where do you see this going?
Like, what do the next 10 or 20 years look like? I mean, we're seeing obvious trends in terms of AI, in terms of crypto, in terms of robotics. And those three in general seem to be like they will be coming together in many ways. And so humans are playing almost like we used to be the kind of like the primary dominant species. And then we have certainly elevated it with AI. So now you basically make in your mobile device connected to the internet. We've basically gone from being like a human species with kind of the library as our index of knowledge to a human species to having our mobile device that's connected to the internet with perfect search, perfect recall on every piece of content. So we are effectively, Elon's famous for saying this, but we're effectively cyborgs now, where our phones are an extension of ourselves, just maybe with a little bit lower bandwidth. Like if you could imagine like injecting the internet into your brain and just having perfect recall individually with the internet, the only real difference here is that we have to kind of Google it on our phone or ask an LLM. But if you tap it into your brain where you can just like read it right away when you think about it, then the bandwidth increases. So that is likely the direction. But in addition to that, now we start to have things like the Tesla robot, Boston Dynamics has a robot. There's a couple other ones that are kind of building it out. And so now we are looking to having kind of like a robotic assistant probably likely joining us in the near like next 10 years, where everyone used to purchase an iPhone. Now it's going to be like, okay, well, what kind of robot do you have? Like, can your robot do this? I just downloaded this new app for my robot. My robot can do my laundry. It can do food, mise en place, right? It can prepare the ingredients. It can clean my home, but it will go further than that, right? It's going to be displacing a lot of jobs, like a lot of like manufacturing plants just won't have people in them anymore, right? It's just going to say, hey, well, you could have a person, but that person can only work for 8 hours a day. They get too tired. They need to cater to the union, right? And a robot can operate 24/7, doesn't complain, and can do things 5 or 10 times faster. So you can see this massive displacement of people, and those people need to go and do something. And I think that content and higher education is likely where most people will end up moving towards. They will be supporters of research. They will be supporters of helping these robots get built. They will be supporters of maintaining these robots. They will be, and then content creators, right? I think content is one of the most beautiful things to kind of be riding the wave on, because content, in addition to the topics that we discuss or the things that we are learning, there is only one of us individually. And so each of us now, I think in the future, will be having a personal brand, where I think it's fantastic to sit down with you right now to talk on this content, because this is our only real asset going forward. Our only asset is who we are, who we know, and kind of what we can do. And so that's kind of the future, I think, of most people working, is going to be some sort of content that they're putting in it all the time. And that does mean that we will have far more content. So we will probably be competing more online. There'll be smaller slivers of attention that we can grab, because everyone will be creating content. And I think one thing that Gary Vee's talked about is that what will be like the dominant apps in the future is TikTok was really strong because it basically would serve up the virality app. So you could have a new video and you could get 20 million views or 5 million views being a brand new user, creating new content, or not even a new user, but just putting out a good piece of content. And one thing he suggested recently that I think is probably true is that the dominant app in the future will not be served to the viral piece will not be 5 million or a million or 10 million. It's going to be you hit the lottery of virality. You had a 500 million viewed video and you were just kind of like, you go from just creating content around the day, always kind of poking and prodding, trying to do new and interesting things, to just being a viral sensation overnight. But then it's also ratcheted down the next day. Your next post goes back to having 500 views or it's not interesting anymore. And so all of these aspects, we can kind of explore them individually if we wanted, but they all have differing kind of dynamics on how society will play out.
It's interesting. So it's almost like in the past, you could create a monopoly on attention with like a slow and consistent growth, and kind of like maybe building a moat around your content, where what TikTok did and maybe some of the newer ways of going viral is that you could be no one, have like massive virality, and then have it dissipate again.
Yeah. And what that means is, I don't know if you've ever seen the Hunger Games. I haven't seen all the movies, but there's a scene in the movie that kind of is very stamped in my mind, and it's, I guess, the head mistress or whatever. If you look at her outfit is just the most obscene thing I've ever seen. It's like, I can almost visualize it, but she has like these big puffy shoulders, a huge hairdo, like brighter than life colors. And I think that that's kind of the direction our society is going to, because that is super attention seeking, right? And that is just a natural evolution of, if you have this chance to go super viral, and virality is a measure of attention, then you are trying to be as attention seeking as possible. You're almost, everyone, or a lot of people that are trying to make it online as content creators will effectively become virtual peacocks. We will try to have the brightest feathers, the most beautiful design, the most eye-catching or kind of attention-drawing activity and content, because that's the only way we can go viral. Everything else just gets blended amongst the mix. And if you put somebody that's attention-seeking, and their content is designed to be attention-seeking, versus somebody that's bland and just saying like, hey, I went and got another coffee today, I mean, you can tell which one's going to go viral. It's the one that is totally different and unique. And back to your earlier question, it's very interesting that all of that also is going to be on chain, right? All of that is going to be searchable. So all of your attempts to go viral, where you put yourself out there like a crazy person, is now going to, like, now you're balancing that. And that's a very interesting game in a lot of people's minds of like, how crazy do I want to be for the chance to go viral, versus what do I think is socially acceptable that will kind of come back to bite me.
It's interesting. So there's this dynamic of celebrity versus authenticity and trust. So if somebody's boring and they're just talking about like serious matters, you would almost go to them for serious situations or serious information. And then there's almost like potentially a differentiation between entertainment and other forms of content. So maybe the virality of the peacocks is good for entertainment, but there's other gaps where not all information is only about entertainment. I think, however, there's definitely a concern, at least for me, with regards to the effect that a lot of this entertaining content online is on our like neurology and our like serotonin release, adrenaline, all these kinds of things, where you can be watching a video about, let's say, a conflict or like a fight or something that's happening, and immediately you're triggered, or there's neural chemicals that are triggered based on you just being a witness, so to speak, of something crazy that's happening. Like if you see, let's say you're watching a video of a fight, if that was happening in front of you in real person, your body's going to produce a lot of like fight or flight chemicals, because it's a real situation that you have to actually like do something about in that moment. But because you can have that experience in the palm of your hand while you're sitting on your couch, you're getting the thrill of those chemicals by being a couch potato. And I think that's creating a very, it's once again, it's one of those dynamics that we need to adjust to by having real life situations in the palm of your hand, and making it more and more realistic is going to definitely be a factor in the future, which kind of makes me think about the last thing I wanted to ask you, and that's specifically around artificial intelligence and how, if we're moving towards artificial intelligence that is more and more capable, more and more intelligent. At some point, do you foresee that artificial intelligence would be indistinguishable from human content creators? And if that's inevitable, then in the world of being online, what do you think is going to be the definition of being a human?
Yeah.
If an AI, for all intents and purposes, is doing the exact same thing that other humans could be doing online.
Yeah, this is a super question. Like, even as I thought about it a little bit before, and then even here, I was just kind of going through my mind of some considerations. So one thing I was thinking about is that, first of all, I think for sure it will get to we will not be able to determine, especially online, who is right, like for a blog post, for instance, who is writing blog posts versus not writing blog posts. We're almost getting there on things like photographs now, and even video is getting close now too, where it's getting harder and harder to distinguish who's real and not. And there are some quick passes that we might consider, right? So one early pass could be like a badge, where it's like, hey, this person is a badge. You only get a badge if you do a KYC with your your
like
passport.
a world coin kind
Yeah,
of
like
approach.
a world coin. They scan your iris and things like that, right? And like that is all great. However, there's even kind of what happens on things like OnlyFans right now, where you have the OnlyFans model, girl at the top or whatever, that's kind of selling her content. But once she gets to a certain number of people, maybe 10,000 followers or something like that, then she goes and hires an OnlyFans management company, and they actually act in the background for her. And is that really so different? Does it matter if it is an AI creating content for the person, or if it's a management company, right? Because she is still presenting all of her kind of conversations or her content as herself, but there is this kind of layer underneath. And
for the moment, that's still human.
And that's still human, right? But like, does it really
matter?
I mean, it certainly matters, but it's kind of like.
But why does it matter actually?
Yeah,
like if you're getting the same effects, if you're chilling at home and it's an AI or it's not an AI, and to you it's all the same.
Yeah.
Why does it actually matter?
Yeah, like I think the only time it starts to matter would be like if you actually maybe the OnlyFans girl is a little bit too like, I don't know, drastic, but like maybe for her, like you actually want to get into a podcast with her and talk to her. And if it's this management company, or if it's this
if it's an artificial creation,
it is no longer acting. It's not tangible, and it's not acting on her behalf. So like you could become a really good relationship with her, but it could be within the confines of what that management company will allow her to do, or the confines of what the AI has been programmed to say I can do. So you could definitely feel like you're on the path to getting into a podcast with this person, but the final decision that's being made is not that person anymore. So they will just say like, or they will not even say no. They will just use reasons not to say no, right? And this is just one example, but it's the same for like people on TikTok, or the same for even businesses, where it's like you have outsourced people into developing nations, where those people are your customer support. And you're like, hey, I want to talk to the business owner about this. And it's like, hey, like business owners live here, like would love to talk to you, right? And it's just not them, right? And so the business owner, there's a separation between, and maybe this even blends in the future, but there's a separation between what the business owner would actually do in some sort of like very hypersensitive moment. Like it might be something like, hey, my grandma is passing away, so can you help me out? And that business owner could have a very personal experience with his grandma that the AI is not trained on, or that kind of customer service department is not trained on. So they wouldn't act like that business owner. They are never going to be a carbon copy. And this is where AI further gets interesting, because if you have all of the recordings of that business owner in data, then actually you can actually get closer and closer and closer to the point where the AI is going to act as a carbon copy of that business owner. And so the question really is not really like if or when, it's like, it's really kind of how far are we along that spectrum? How close is the AI to the actual person? And right now there's just this disconnect.
So if we take a hypothetical scenario and we go maybe even further into the future than that moment, where you have potentially a whole ecosystem of AIs to the point where the business founder themselves from the very beginning was an AI. So it was a specific model that happened to be, let's say it was even created or born out of AI. So there's almost zero human connection. It managed to figure out a unique set of things that allowed it to create a business. And then it's the business owner, it's outsourcing its support, it's doing whatever. Is there how do you think about that future and our place in it?
Yeah.
So if you had an entire, let's say, economy that was basically run by AIs, then where is the human element? And I agree with you. At the end of the day, you want to sit down with a coffee for someone. Until robots are as realistic as humans, I think that's going to be the fundamental difference is at a physical layer.
Yeah.
But in the online world, if you're sitting on a remote island somewhere and your only interaction with the rest of society is online, then what is really the differentiation between that AI business owner and a human business owner?
Yeah. I think the answer is probably gets to be that doesn't matter, right? The only thing that matters is probably the dollars that are kind of being facilitated by the business. Just as an example, you can imagine historically people would travel by horse and buggy, right? And horse and buggy eventually got better and better. Maybe you'd have better carts and stuff like that. And then we effectively created a AI for transportation, right? The service
artificial horse.
Yeah, exactly. We created an artificial horse, which is a machine, right? We created a car, right? And that car drove us around. And I think that's probably similar to how we now deal with AI, which is creating an artificial human or artificial conversation or an artificial discussion or anything or artificial content. We will go from having to worry about if it's living or not and just saying like, okay, well, how do we use this, right? So the car does whatever we want, right? In the confines of physics based on what it can do. And the same thing with this AI. It's like, we're going to say, hey, can you clean up my house? And it's just going to clean up the house. And does it matter if it's a person or not? Not really. But for sure, humans' role with all of that is now just tuning the cars, designing the cars, making them improve. And then the craziest part is that we're at this new point in AI, basically, that we're approaching, or seems to be approaching, where we get AGI, where it's now just going to be like, we just tell it as we actually as a society have to be very concerned about what is the direction that we want AI to go, because it's going to get there, right? So if we say, hey, we want everyone to enjoy their day, right? It's going to optimize for that. And that could be too much enjoyment, right? Or it could be like, we want everyone to be need a fitness instructor. And it's like, okay, well, to what extent? So now as a society, we're basically going to have some collective thought, because we live in a society. But who makes that collective thought? There's all these like governance issues that we were kind of briefly talking before this about. But it's who is going to set the guiding rules of what we want AI to do, because they will do it better than humans can do.
Yeah, it's almost the way some people frame this is it's the magic genie problem. So you can ask it to do whatever you want, but you always have to be careful of your wishes coming true.
Very careful, very careful. Yeah.
So this is a major factor. And
just quickly on that, I guess the question is, how careful do we have to be, right? Because if it is AGI, sometimes how we talk about it, this kind of esoteric idea of like it's smarter than humans, it's self-learning, it's sentient, and it can rapidly improve itself. There's a spectrum there. It's like, well, how quickly can an AI go from kind of being a robot that needs a cane to get around and like extra support, needs to change its battery every 15 minutes, to literally doing everything that, I don't know, Usain Bolt, like you can run faster than Usain Bolt. Like the question is how fast is it, right? Because depending on how fast it can improve will impact how kind of stringent we need to be on the rules of its game that it's playing.
Yeah. So going back to the analogy of the horse, it's an interesting analogy because at one point, especially after we developed the technology, the horse population has peaked.
Totally, right?
And now horses are still there, but the utilization of horses and its economic value is less important than entertainment value. And there's often analogies about like what the AIs will do with us at the point where it's. Have you thought about that, and have you thought about maybe different directions of the future of potential reality where there's a far superior intelligence to us, and then we become like the horse in the story of the horse and buggy?
Yeah, totally. I mean, this is a super question, and I mean, it really depends on what we want to optimize for, right? If we want to, like, these are harder hitting questions. like it depends on, like, I know like Elon Musk is really keen on kind of going to Mars, right?
Yeah.
And things like that. So I mean, there's certainly aspects of, like, if you want to get to Mars faster, you can develop robots faster. The problem with developing robots to be kind of sentient and spatially aware and kind of self-improving is that you get to a point where you're not so far away from the robot just being like, you know what, I appreciate you guys creating us, but like we had enough of you, so we're gonna create the human zoo basically.
Yeah.
Right? And like we're gonna appreciate the humans as like our creators, but there's not really a need for you guys anymore, right? And so we are the creators right now. We are the creators of these robots. So the question is it like, what is the future that we want? And the other question is that, does it matter what we want? Is there somebody in our society that can slow this down right now? Is there somebody that can slow down the advent of technology? I mean, even right now we have e-acceleration, E/ACC, right? That is an extreme techno-optimist society, right? And they're that, like, generally, I've been in technology my whole life, right? Keep developing. But there is a question, almost, there's this analogy that I know of called the boiling frog. Basically, the boiling frog is that if you put a frog into boiling water, it jumps out. It goes, oh shit, like, I didn't want to be there. That's way too hot. And the flip side of that is that if you put a boiling frog into
into water,
lukewarm or something, right, and then you turn up the heat and it starts to boil, it basically will fry itself. And even if it's true or not, we certainly see that in society all the time, where it's even like as we pass these new laws where it's like, okay, smoking for a long time was socially acceptable and was actually encouraged, and then we basically went to battle as a society with smoking institutions. We say like, well, that's not really good. Secondhand smoke's terrible, and we all now generally accept that smoking's bad for ourselves, right? And so we have changed our social norms and social acceptance. Same thing's happening with AI right now. It used to be, or even video calls with iPad. It used to be insane that you get onto a video call. Now we meet people on video calls, and for that specific, I think it's just going to keep going because I have many charts right now showing remote work just going up to the right. We're at all-time highs. And so the question is, for related to this AI, is, do we care? And even if we do care, who is the one that slows that down or turns it off?
There's a great parallel that you drew there, because if we go back to the potential negative effects that having online video has on specifically the youth who, as they're still developing, are having these, let's call it fake experiences and having neural chemicals that are not realistic to what somebody who was born without the digital world would have received if they were still growing up in the wild, let's say. So if you think about it like that, there's clearly cause for concern to think about how much exposure we're giving these growing minds in the digital world and the kind of content they're consuming. And I think that's potentially a bigger threat to mental health right now than where AI is for mental health. But there's not a massive uproar about that to the degree that people are passing laws or creating technologies that can actually influence the negative trends. And there's clearly positive trends that, if you go to the parallel of artificial intelligence, the extreme negative aspects of it is pretty well documented in movies like Terminator. However, if we were to actually try to do something about it, what do we have to do different to what's clearly transpired in the online world, where kind of online content is just run rampant, and TikTok has definitely influenced young minds in ways that we have still we're only going to find out 10 years from now what those effects actually happen on those kids. So what could we do different with regards to artificial intelligence if it's potentially going to grow faster than what content transmission is?
Yeah, like, these are great questions. Again, so
maybe one way to frame it, because it's a very broad question. What are the types of things that would be good to think about? Like, what categories of things would be good to think about around this topic instead of just trying to get this topic head on?
I mean, it gets to, okay, well, what content is being served, right? So the content that is being served is the environment for our mind to feed on, right? So if you put a bunch of math content and it's only math content, the people will get a lot better at math. And so the question is that really, because there's only a few companies that are dictating kind of the content that's being served for things like the For You feed or the recommendation algorithms, I'm sure there is, but
there's like a magic hand in the background that's
there's certainly a magic hand,
that, yeah.
Like even on TikTok at the start, like originally it was all sorts of content, and then it became different types of content, and that content in a way looks, we can look at it and be like, okay, well that's viral content, but I agree, I think that there's probably a magic hand in the background saying like, you know what, like we're going to tone that down by 30%. And over time we have the effect of the kind of boiling frog again, where it's like you just get like, oh, that stuff's no more, like it's not viral anymore. And people maniacally look at their kind of their view count. And so if they start to put out content and that has 10,000 views, and the next week it starts to get 2,000 views or 500 views, they will change their strategy very quickly. There are YouTubers online and people that will write blog posts being like, okay, these are the things that are optimizing. And not only the people that write things, you can actually just go to websites and say, what is trending right now? And what happens is that there's this follow-along effect. It's like the second the thing that starts trending changes, it takes a week for all of the content cycle to change to that new trending thing. So they don't have to impact everyone. All they have to do is tell the world what the new trending thing is, and everyone goes that way.
Yeah, or potentially not even at that level, just making adaptations to the algorithm.
Yeah.
So you could have a small tweak in the algorithm that has outside effects on huge amounts of the population. So I guess it's a question of centralized control versus kind of like a laissez-faire, everyone can do whatever they want. And if you're controlling the algorithm that says this type of content is going to get more virality, then I guess the question here, if you compare it to AI, is to what degrees do you try to create laws and governance around what centralized companies are allowed, like what kind of adaptations to the algorithms are they allowed to have, or do you just let it go viral and
just let it go, right?
Yeah, just let it go, and then like everything will figure itself out. And I think these are big questions that we need to look at with regards to the use of AI. And I think the interesting part about content is it has been a very free market enterprise in the realm of content, information sharing, and that kind of thing, and all the pros and cons that's happened, where you can have any content out there almost instantaneously anywhere in the world, and compare that to AI, where it's not necessarily just about content, but it's about actual real life things that AI can potentially do, especially when you end up connecting it to, factories or distribution or even robots that can actually create effects in the real world. Then it's not just the confinement of content and how that affects our minds. It like becomes like a physical concern. So that I think there's some interesting examples to look at, different models for managing content, good and bad, the negative and positive effects that it's had on us as humanity, and then trying to see if there's similarities to that in AI.
You know what's interesting about it is that these are all very true. One thing that there is a natural counterbalance that I guess we already brought up in this discussion, but that content that could go viral or it gets trending, and that is definitely impacted by the weights of these algorithms, saying like this is good or this is bad. When you start to have a history online of reputation, we are almost self kind of disciplining. I don't know what the exact word is, but this idea where it's like we are self-coaching ourselves based on the reputation, because if we do something that is, when it's attached to us and it's attached to our reputation for life, we actually act differently than doing it if it was anonymous or there were no repercussions. So for instance, if you look at the content on VibePut right now, and obviously VibePut is a new system, and I really appreciate the kind of the content that we have. Generally, it's kind of very good quality content, good quality people. But if you compare it against something like a Reddit, where there are no repercussions for being a bad actor or no way to separate kind of bad actors or absurd content from the good people. And I don't know if it's good or bad, but just more kind of more reasonable approach where, and maybe reasonable can be defined in the sense that if you say something, the person will actually respond to what you say.
So there's a lot more anonymous trolls on Reddit.
Yeah, I would say there's far more anonymous trolls on Reddit. I don't know if you would agree.
I don't use Reddit.
Yeah, or like so like these platforms is, and generally what we've seen in the past, and I don't have to go through all the examples, but what we've seen in the past is that people that don't have repercussions act differently than if they had repercussions. And it can be a good way as well as a bad way. And generally, because things are a little bit more structured with our real lives, it tends to go the other way because people are trying to, it's almost like this yin and yang where it's like people feel confined a little bit with their reputation. So when they lose their reputation online and they're kind of active free will, they almost like to go exploring this kind of open pasture of like, hey, I can do whatever I want. And so I think that over time, this laissez-faire, in a way too, what's very interesting about it is that our whole world has been laissez-faire to begin with. Everything has been laissez-faire, and we're at this point now where we are deciding if we want to go back to laissez-faire or if we want to get less laissez-faire. But this whole human experiment started as laissez-faire. And so we are basically now at our best version of what we think laissez-faire should be like.
Okay, I think we should definitely continue this conversation.
Yeah.
We've got a couple of hours of content here.
Yeah.
Let's pick it up next time. I think we had a good tour de force of content and the parallels to artificial intelligence. And we'll do a few more episodes on it.
Awesome.
Cool. Thanks, Chris.
Yeah.
Cheers.
Thanks.